21 politically appointed staff employed by the Department of the Taoiseach. This includes those working directly for me in my office, those working in the Government Information Service, staff working for the Independent Alliance and for independent ministers, staff in the office of the Government Chief Whip, staff in the office of the Leader of the Seanad. The 10 staff working directly with me are my Chief of Staff, Head of Policy and Programme Implementation, and 5 special advisors and 3 personal assistants. In addition, the Government Press Secretary acts as a spokesperson for me and for Government, and is assisted by an Assistant Government Press Secretary in coordinating the media relations for all Government departments. The Deputy Government Press Secretary is also based in my department and coordinates communications for all the independents in Government. Also employed by my department are the Chief Strategist for the Independent Alliance and the Political Coordinator for the Independent Ministers in Government. In the Office of the Government Chief Whip, which is also based in my department, there are 2 special advisors and 2 civilian drivers working for Minister Kine. My department also employs 2 civilian drivers who are based in the Office of the Leader of the Seanad in the House of the Oireachtas. Special advisors working with Minister of State McEntee and Minister of State Keogh are employed by the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade and the Department of Defence, respectively.
Is it 21 political staff, you said? 21 people. Does that exclude the drivers? And is it including everybody else you've listed? Is it 21? Can I ask you if you have given instructions yourself to ministers to hire journalists as political advisors, because there's been some raised eyebrows at the number of journalists who have now been hired and work for ministers. Is this something that you recommend? You have 8 special advisors, including the Government Press Secretary, plus a further 2 for the Independent Alliance and the Deputy Press Secretary. Am I right on that? A large number of junior ministers now also have special advisors. If you recall, in the previous government that you and I were both members of, only 2 junior ministers who didn't attend government had special advisors. One, the Minister for European Affairs at the time, and the other, the Deputy Junior Minister for Health. But now I understand that that's up to 5, with the latest ones being Minister Halligan, McEntee, Daly, Boxer Morn and Michael Darcy having special advisors. Can you confirm also if Sean Kenny and Andrew Doyle have been granted special advisors? So what is the criteria to determine who gets a special advisor now in the junior ministerial ranks? And can you tell me what the total cost of the political staff in your department is? Just on a rough calculation here, it's at least €1.5 million. Am I in the ballpark with that, or can you confirm the figure for me?
Deputy Micheál Martin.
Distinctively political Taoiseach for many years, you obviously put significant store on your appointed advisors, and you make sure that you always have at hand a political attack for when you're under pressure. Equally, your political advisors are expected to be very active in looking for marketing opportunities. And what is incredibly surprising, Taoiseach, is that given the sheer number of times that you talked about the Children's Hospital in the first half of the year, talked quite a lot about it, including using public money on social media promotion of your good self. For some reason, Taoiseach, it basically disappeared from your speeches as the year went on. And in fact, in your Ardèche speech on November 17, you didn't mention it or the Health Capital Programme at all. And at the start of last August, the government reappointed the entire board of the National Children's Hospital. A few weeks later, information emerged about a significant scale of overspend, and apparently this was accepted by the government without any review and without calling for any heads to roll. And indeed, it was only when the overspend became public that you, Taoiseach, and the Minister for Health, Simon Harris, began to say that you were very concerned and it was wrong and so on like that, and it called for a PwC review and so on. Now, one would have to say, given the extent of the political operation at the heart of government, are you surprised, Taoiseach, that this issue didn't surface earlier? Would it maybe have been identified if the Cabinet Committees met more regularly? Should the Cabinet Committees on Infrastructure and Health not have been receiving regular updates on the costings of such a major component of the National Development Plan, such as the National Children's Hospital? Is it because you were planning an election that this had to be buried? Like, it doesn't. I listened to your answers to Deputy Howlin earlier. You said the Minister for Health became aware in August of overspends, but he did the right thing, and I assume you're saying he did the right thing by waiting until November to tell you and to tell the Minister for Expenditure. And he didn't bother asking anybody any more questions between then and November. That doesn't add up, Taoiseach. It just simply doesn't add up and is not credible. Particularly when we had, as Deputy Howlin said earlier, we all had that huge issue about the current overspend in health. Was it going to be 800 million? Meanwhile, on the capital side, the Minister's aware, and I think a lot of other people must have been aware, that there's a major overspend arising on the Children's Hospital. But don't mention it to anybody. It seems to have been the order of the day. And it's only when it got out that the government is racing to try and patch up and cover your tracks, announcing the PwC review and so on and so on, and now the chairman resigns. There was none of that between August and November. I think, Taoiseach, a meaningful and credible explanation has to be given by government on why the Minister for Health did not alert his cabinet colleagues on the overspend that he was aware of in August. We're talking about a massive overspend here. And while I'm at it, he needs to explain to the House, because in September the House was told, Deputy Barry Cowan was told that it was up to $1 billion. Now, I heard Minister Harris's remarks to the Sean O'Rourke show yesterday. I wasn't happy with his response. He seemed to suggest that commercial sensitivities took precedence over telling the truth to the House.
Deputy Mayor Lou McDonald.
Wouldn't be a first to cite commercial sensitivities to keep full information from public view. I think we're all aware of that. Taoiseach, can I ask you on a separate matter, can you confirm or deny reports that Cabinet has decided to put back the referendum on the extension of presidential voting rights from May until October? Can you give us the rationale for that, please? And you might cite which of your political advisers, if they were proffering this advice, what was the basis of it?
Taoiseach.
Thanks very much. I noted Deputy Martin describing me as one of the most instinctive politicians. I'm not sure you meant it as a compliment, but instinct is very valuable in politics, so I'll choose to take it as a compliment. Anyway, to answer your questions, the 21 political staff includes drivers, and obviously not for me, I'd Garda drivers, but includes drivers for the Chief Whip and the Leader of the Shannon. So that figure of 21 is inclusive of drivers. They include staff in my own office in the Department of Taoiseach, obviously include my constituency staff as well, staff that are assigned to the Independent Alliance, to independent ministers, and also to Minister Kine as Chief Whip, who's a minister in my department. So while all these people are on the payroll of the Department of the Taoiseach, they certainly don't all vote for me, all work for me. They may not know who they vote for, but they certainly don't all work for me. They work for the they work for the Chief Whip and independents. Well, the ones who work for independents may well vote for independents, of course. In terms of the cost, I've fewer political staff than all three of my previous predecessors, and their total payroll is less than my three previous predecessors. I think by forebear 23, and Taoiseach Cowan had even more again. I'm not sure about Taoiseach. I don't know the exact figure, but it's the lowest.
How do you know it's lower if you don't have it?
Well, because I know for a fact, I make sure it's lower. But I make sure that I have fewer. And financial reasons, and for factual reasons, I think it's a good thing that I have fewer advisors. And that their salaries cost less than any of the last three previous Taoiseach going back until the 1990s. You know, it's been uniquely unusual, Lascan Corla, that when this issue comes up in the chamber, I'm criticised for not having more advisors. I'm constantly asked why I don't have an advisor for X or an advisor for Y. It must be the first time in decades that the Taoiseach has been criticised for not having enough advisors. I don't have as many as my last three previous predecessors. I'll provide you the figure. I don't have it in front of me.
Do you know what it's less than that?
Yes, I do. Yeah. Anyway, To answer the
And the clock is...
to answer the other questions the deputy's asked, I haven't given any instructions on ministers on whom to hire. So there are no instructions, but on occasion, if they're going to hire somebody, they will ask my opinion. They don't always, but they usually do. In terms of hiring journalists, yes, a number of journalists have been hired by ministers as their advisors. Indeed, one of my advisors is a former journalist. I think it's a particularly useful thing that if you're going to be a press advisor or working in a press role, that you perhaps have experience as a journalist. I'm surprised at the number of press officers and press advisors who've never actually worked a day in their lives as a journalist. I think that's useful experience for somebody who's going to be working with the media to know how the media work and how they operate. And also there are a lot of journalists who know a lot about topics. There are quite a large number of journalists who have been following a particular issue or a particular policy area for many years and many decades. And while they mightn't, have worked for an NGO, or they mightn't have, a particular academic qualification in that area, they do actually know a lot about what they write about, precisely because they have been following it for 10 or 20 years. I'm again fascinated by the quality of the advisors and Deputy Martin's staff, that they've actually went through all my speeches to graph how often I said how often I mentioned the Children's Hospital in a speech and how often I didn't. I'm not sure that's the best use of taxpayers' money, but nonetheless, I actually hadn't noticed that was the case. So I'll make sure to include the National Children's Hospital in more of my speeches into the future, because this is a project this government is delivering. I've seen this figure used from time to time of the project costing 1.7 billion. You only get to that figure by including the 30 or 40 million that a Fianna Fáil government spent on the Matter site on a hospital that was never built. This project is going to be delivered, and it's going to be there for 100 years or 200 years.
Taoiseach, you have a few minutes left.
As is always the case, Carl, I'm answering the questions one by one as they were asked, but the more interruptions obviously makes it harder to answer the questions.
Can you serve now?
I was also asked by... in relation, yes, I'm getting to that, in relation to Minister Harris. As I said earlier, I think he did the right thing back in August by seeking full information. He didn't have a figure in August. He didn't have a figure in August. I don't know what he was told. He was told that there is...
Taoiseach, please, if we're going to get... Listen, the clock is running down. The clock is running down.
Taoiseach,
sorry, Deputy Martin, the Taoiseach to answer the questions that he was asked.
Yeah. Obviously, I wasn't party to the conversation, so I don't know exactly what he was told. But what he has told me, he was told, was that there was a concern about escalating costs at the National Children's Hospital. He sought that due diligence be done. There wasn't a figure. He asked the figures be done. It was part of a commercial negotiation with the contractor. Due diligence was done to bring down those costs, to negotiate with the contractor, to find out what the costs were for, to see if there was other options such as retendering, to see if spec could have been taken out of it. So there wasn't a figure, certainly not a definitive figure until November. And again, I explained that earlier. And I think Deputy Martin referred to it getting out. It got out in December because we disclosed that the government made a decision to allocate 1.4 billion to cover the construction costs of Children's Hospital. There was no secret about it. We disclosed that publicly in December before Christmas. On the referendum on voting rights for citizens abroad, we had a memo, and in North, we had a memo on that in Cabinet today. We agreed that we would proceed with a referendum on extending voting rights to all citizens, no matter where they live, in Northern Ireland or in other parts of the world. It won't just be passport holders, it will be all citizens, because some citizens don't have a passport, perhaps can't afford one, perhaps can't travel. But we've taken the decision that this referendum could be contentious, will involve a lot of planning, needs a good campaign, and we want to win it. And given the uncertainty around Brexit at the moment, and given the fact we have local European elections and other referenda on May 24th, we want to have it in October instead, to give us more time to prepare the ground, to give us more time to inform people, to give us a better chance, I believe, of getting it passed. And of course, the next presidential election is not scheduled until 2025, so I believe we have a lot of time yet to get it done. But the commitment is to do it now in the last week of October.
Thank you. We have just enough time.